Hello, brothers and sisters. Raven here. We're going to continue through these letters Blair Adams wrote to the leadership of Homestead Heritage. Now, we're going to go into the second letter today. Maybe if I can get through it fast enough, we can even go to the third, which is very short, and finish off. I doubt it, but we'll see. So first, let's go over what was in the first letter and some details about it. The first letter he wrote, generally, it was just him trying to put things in place to keep order in Homestead Heritage after he's gone. At least that's the way he acted. Now, as we saw, it was very much about making sure things didn't go away from what he wanted it to be, what his plans for it were. He was very much treating himself as the final authority, and he needed to put these rules in place because it couldn't be any other leadership. It had to be his. We saw a lot of that. And what he was really getting into was having a board that would decide whether or not somebody could be a member or be let into the group after having left. Things like that. And going through it, what we saw over and over and over and over again was how it was nothing but him wanting to keep control even after he's gone. This is about him wanting that authority, wanting that power. The big thing I want you to keep in mind is what happened at the end of it. If you remember, he ended that letter saying a lot about how he wanted the other leaders, which are the ones who read these letters, to go and think about it and really give him corrections, give him advice, ideas, etc., and really being so humble and wanting them to correct him. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, because at the end, he goes and he pretty much claims that what he's written is inspired by God. So remember that. That was how it ended. So remember that he gave that suggestion to them, just the leaders. So this is a small group. So this letter is one that's not going to take a while for people to read because it's just for a few particular people and it's not that long. So this isn't the kind of thing that you're going to have to wait a while for the whole group to read or anything. It should be done pretty quick. And so remember that he told them, please give me advice. And watch how much they seem to have done that based on this next letter. This second letter is dated as April 9th of 2004. Last one was April 3rd. So this is about a week. They've had about a week to read this and respond. And he's had about a week to think through it. And then he writes this. So let's get started. This letter really continues what I began in my last letter and is not understandable apart from that letter. So right here, we know immediately, okay, he's not really correcting it. He's not really changing it. He's adding to it. He's continuing from it. So we can already be pretty certain and confident that he is not going to make any major changes. There's nothing that he may have made a mistake with that he needs to correct. But are there any small ones? Don't know. But by that first sentence, we know, okay, he's not changing what he said. He's adding to it. So in his own thoughts, through what he wrote, he didn't have any problems. So we can't go and say that that letter I have gone and judged falsely because he didn't really hold to that. It was just poorly written. Didn't really explain it well enough because he's staying loyal to it. So continuing on. Given several recent situations that were moving toward some sort of resolution, but apart from any given pattern, I felt pressed, as I told you, to get some clay on the wheel as soon as possible. Now, what this is supposed to sound like is saying, look, I know we've had something come up recently of people wanting to resolve and fix this, but let me help make it a good, strong resolution. That's not what he's really saying. Based on everything else we've already heard about his leadership being the only leadership, and the fact that he just said this is continuing on from what he just wrote. What this is really saying is everybody wants to bring this to a resolution, but let me give you the proper resolution instead of following what they want to do. Listen to me. Follow me. I know the right way to do this. But I also said that, given the hurried circumstances, I also wanted to pray and study on the matter further. Okay, so are we going to see something changed? You want to guess? I have done so and now feel much closer to a fuller resolution of several needs. So no, he's just going to add to it. He's not going to change anything. He's not going to fix any problems. I'm sure you know how a slight shift in vision can bring many shifts in the body. And as troublesome as it might seem, I would like to now try to introduce another step in the important changes that I believe will save us much trouble in the future. Now, going by the assumption that they are honest in being Christian and biblical and believing in the Bible, this would mean he is admitting what they've done previously was not from the Lord because it needs to change. However, as I've heard from many people, even people trying to defend, there are many things, almost everything, to some extent, that he's claimed came from the Lord. We've seen it in the last letter. So this should be a huge red flag to any true believer who's there. Continuing on, I've given a good deal of thought to the complexity of the many and diverse issues that can be involved in matters of new membership, reinstatement of membership, and disfellowshipping. So we're going to stay stuck on this topic of who can be a member. These included the immediate, pressing, and serious needs that have recently been brought to my attention about the impending move from Austin of families with unconverted and unbaptized children, with an accompanying confusion about whether these questions should be resolved by the Land Settlement Board or the Membership Board. So they do have multiple boards for all these little details. This is sounding very much like a government. Now note, for those of you who don't know, Austin, Texas is kind of where they started in Texas. After having been in Colorado for a year, they had a few people in Texas, in Austin. And it was there where a lot of people were as they were building what they now have in Waco. So just to clarify a bit, yes, there are people of Homestead Heritage in Austin. That's what he's talking about. As a consequence, although I initially thought a reinstatement board and membership board would suffice to cover all of these matters, I now feel that these and other related needs should be handled by the same board in order to avoid confusion. This is the first time I can say I 100% agree. It's ridiculous to need another board for that, and it is going to only cause confusion. But watch where he goes. Working at cross purposes or duplications of effort between the many that would be involved on the two or more different boards. For this reason, with regard to general structure, procedures, and the reasons already given for both, all this is in the last letter, and that follows here will apply to this board, even though the single board will play a part in dealing with all three membership activities. Determining new members, reinstatement of old or disciplined members, and disassociating or disfellowshipping of disciplined members. After making some sense here and talking about it being this one board, he now says this statement that shows more of how this board needs to follow what he talks about in this letter. Again, as he spoke of in the last letter, this system he is setting in place. So it's not the board. It's him, his system, his way of doing it. The board that we will here now designate as the membership board will function as an administration or government. Once again, government, that's very much what this is looking like, of this church with regard to confirming new members, confirming reinstatements of members, and, if called upon, with confirming, guiding, and counseling in instances of disassociation or disfellowshipping. I feel that decisions to disassociate or disfellowship should still fall under the full authority of the group ministers, but if they feel the need for confirmation, guidance, or advice as to the manner and or extent of the discipline or separation, it would be this membership board they should be consulting. Individual ministers will still have to assume full, active, decisive responsibility before God in these matters. They are not matters for passive, watered-down committee action or inaction. This is almost like you're trying to set up a government that is treated as though an anarchy. Sounds very much like the way a cult would be. All this also means that this board will need to establish as soon as possible policies to govern all three of those areas. I feel that the last letter and this letter will help to cover the duress needs in two of these areas pretty well. But we also need to firm up our policies on when, by what age, young people raised in the community should enroll in baptism preparation courses. Little disturbing, but let's just continue. And what that will mean for those who don't or haven't, and how to deal with young adults who attend Sunday meetings but do not seek baptism. So they're even getting to a point now where these boards, this government they're putting in place, is going to have to start bringing their authority upon those who aren't members. Interesting. We also need to further clarify just what each level of discipline, disassociation and disfellowshipping, entails and what each means in terms of the disciplined members' release from or breaking of covenant. There are, of course, other questions relevant to establishing clear guidelines for how this board is to function. But I feel these three major areas for clarifications and recordings are a priority concern at this time. Know what this does. Okay, again, this is something between the lines. This is something that's not said flat out, but is very much what this causes. He says, there are other questions, concerns, there are other things to talk about, other things to go over. Then he says, but I feel these three major areas are the concern for now. In other words, don't go thinking about these other topics. Don't go considering these other problems. Focus on what I'm telling you. In other words, don't go thinking without me. Follow me. Follow the path my mind is taking. Don't go thinking yourself. That's what this does. The last letter dealt with reinstatement procedures. I've just mentioned the need for procedure in certain discipline cases that seem pressing. In this letter, however, I would mainly like to address some specific concerns with regard to new membership. Okay, so now he's moving from that topic of bringing people back in, becoming members once again, and now he wants to talk more about new members. However, funny thing is, he didn't really talk that much about it. This whole thing keeps going back to his authority. So let's see if this time he really can stick to the topic. I already stated that I feel the membership board should serve to confirm decisions made by individual group ministers and or the elders with regard to all three areas of membership in their respective groups. I see this as especially applicable wherever there is some question or confusion. in regard to reinstatements or new memberships. So it's not going to be just new memberships. This is going to be reinstatements again. So are you moving on to this topic or not? I think of questions such as these. 1. Has this candidate for reinstatement come to an authentic place of repentance and honesty that would allow him to become a bona fide member of the church on any level without hurting the church or its weak and vulnerable members? Just a side note, what do you want to bet? When he speaks of weak and vulnerable members, the people he'd really think of are the few people that are truly thinking for themselves. Or 2, given that many young people raised in the context of the community confuse having been a participant in the community with becoming a participating member of the church. Just how can we know when they have truly repented and come to a genuine faith in God in preparation for baptism, so that we do not incorporate into the church souls who only think they are converted but are not, and who may then go on to create unsanctified families will certainly bring other untold problems into the church. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I'm just going to say this because this is something that I think is a major problem everywhere in our country. This is a misunderstanding of what is the church. The church is the body. The body is the people. Now, I will say, yes, this can be a problem. Yes, I understand what he's getting at. But let me say, this shows you they don't see the church as being what the church is. They see the church as being Homestead Heritage. To state the problem a little differently, we can draw a contrast between two situations concerning new members. Okay, so we are going to focus on new members now. Maybe. 1. New members formerly unfamiliar with the fellowship will naturally come through the home churches, but with far fewer questions as to their genuine conversion, at least when mature and responsible leaders oversee these home fellowships. Note that last part. At least when mature and responsible leaders oversee these home fellowships. So only if one of our leaders is there to be sure they're being brainwashed properly. That's not what he's saying, but that's what it means. That's what this comes down to. Yet, with young people raised in the context of the community and who have therefore unconsciously mastered the language and appearance of the fellowship, which is all Homestead is. It's nothing but language and appearance. This right here is him pointing back at himself without realizing it. Because this is exactly how they penetrate their targets. He knows to be wary of this because that's what he does. That's how Homestead spreads. Penetrating churches and taking on the language and appearance of Christianity. Again, hypocrisy 101. So the membership board would likely be more concerned with community-raised youth than with new converts from outside the community. The new baptism preparation course goes far in helping us address this latter need, and I believe that it should operate under the guidance of the membership board, which will lean heavily, perhaps almost entirely, on the results of this course and the assessments of its teachers in regard to candidates for baptism and membership. Again, he's not staying on track. He keeps going back to, again, giving this system this authority. It's not about how to use the authority very much. Just barely touches on that. It's not about the authority it has or the rules it has. No, this is more about getting that authority. Making sure the authority lands where he, Blair Adams, wants it. So far, he doesn't really seem to be adding much to this. He just seems to be reinforcing how necessary this structure he is trying to build is. Let's keep going. There are, however, other situations that such a board would also have to address. At this particular time, we have a group of people whose needs and those of the church would not necessarily be adequately covered in the above ways. First, the need of these people of the church will not be met by the group ministers because the people I'm referring to are all coming into new relationships with different group ministers. Very vague so far. So this seems to be things that were going on at the time within Homestead that he doesn't seem to really want to address directly. I wonder why. Moreover, their need in the churches will not be met by the above-mentioned teachers simply because many are not in baptism preparation classes. Boy, they really put a lot of weight on this whole thing with baptism and membership, as we've seen in their baptismal agreement. The need I'm referring to concerns, of course, the large number of the unconverted, unbaptized adult and teenage children of members who will soon be moving to Waco from Austin. So see, this is showing more of what I mentioned earlier. It's people coming out of Austin as though that's sort of a starting point, and then Waco is where you go as you're really a true member. That's what this is sort of hinting at. And this shows a lot, because this shows just how careful they are to make sure these people are prepared or of the right mind, etc. In other words, it's to make sure these people really are fully brainwashed before they're spending much time around those within Waco. This particular situation has, and other similar situations will no doubt in the future continue to have, the potential for causing a great deal of harm and conflict for the congregation here in Waco and elsewhere, especially in this particular case in regard to the greater level of interaction between the Waco and Austin young people. More and more of him wanting that control. More and more of what makes a cult a cult. Quite a number of the Austin young people are currently reading church literature and attending classes in preparation for baptism, but there are also a number of them who have not yet taken even these initial steps. Do you notice what he didn't mention there? Reading church literature and attending classes in preparation for baptism. What about the reading of scripture, sir? Because that's not their priority. As we've been noticing more and more, many of these Austin young people have serious spiritual needs and are often behind schedule in terms of discipleship and education, and many have been overly touched by the world's influence through urban employment and urban living conditions, with all the accompanying urban exaltation of economic values. In other words, they're going more into that system instead of our system. There is also the very real threat of losing of our good testimony, the large surrounding community of these young people, if these young people do not press into relationships of serious discipleship, moving them toward conversion. Two things I want to point out here. First of all, and in a way can be the more pressing matter spiritually. Why is discipleship put before conversion? Doesn't discipleship come after conversion? It's because it's brainwashing. They have everything backwards. Completely upside down. But notice what it said at the start of this sentence. There is also the very real threat of losing of our good testimony with the larger surrounding community. He's worried of the truth coming out. The very thing they fled Colorado to avoid, the very thing they've built their community the way they have with these fairs and these businesses, his major concern here is their reputation. If this world, if all this stuff they're getting mixed up in the urban things is the problem, why do you care about your reputation in it? Because you're a cult and you want to be unidentified. Plain and simple. Continuing on. For these reasons, I feel this particular group of young people, as well as others in similar situations in the future, may call for more direct decision-making rather than just confirmations on the part of the membership board, at least at this particular time. So in other words, don't just do this as subtly, don't just brainwash this as subtly, force this upon them. It's not what he's saying, but that's where it leads. But since the question involves our whole effort to incorporate the parents of the Austin youth into the Waco body as participating members, it seems a task for the membership board, not the land settlement board. Again, other similar needs will probably arise in the future in other situations. So after we see a little bit of something that will be an issue of these multiple boards, he kind of pushes it. Again, he is supporting more of multiple boards. One possible solution for this particular situation might be to establish from the start some sort of concrete mentoring type relationships without particularly conflicting young people, but I mention this as only a possibility. He's already talked about discipleship. He's already talked about the teachings and leadership. All of a sudden, he brings this in, and it just feels very out of place. So what is he talking about? Some sort of concrete mentoring type relationships with particularly conflicting young people. Why are these conflicted young people? How would this be mentoring? But I mention this as only a possibility. He really leaves this very vague. What I think he's thinking here is he's thinking about finding young people who are very devoted to the ways of Homestead Heritage, sort of pairing them up with the ones who are more rebellious to try to turn them the right way. In other words, get them under the right kind of peer pressure, in a sense. It's kind of ironic, because normally I would say that's not going to help. That's not the way to do it. That's probably going to make it so that the problem, the rebellious one, is going to influence the other. That's usually the more likely way it goes. However, once again, this is a cult. When you have somebody who is, to them, in a good frame of mind, are the ones that are more obedient, they're not doing it on their own. They're not doing it by the brainwashing of the cult. In this case, they're going to be the ones who are probably more devoted, not the rebellious type. That's why he suggests this. If it wasn't that kind of society, he would not suggest this. With this in mind, there might be a spiritual pairing of certain older ones according to the unconverted youth with a particular brother. Like Webb, Randy, Brim, Daddy, blah, 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 blah. Maybe others that you know better than I do. These mentors would not necessarily be ministers, but it would not necessarily exclude them either. I don't know for sure. Interesting. The one thing out of all of what he's written in these two letters, we finally see Blair a little unsure. Why? Because here it's talking about a sense of giving authority to others. He's not comfortable with that. But these brothers could help oversee and direct the discipleship of Austin young people toward a commitment to God and to the community. So could help oversee. With the ultimate goal of baptism. So this baptism. Now, really quick, just a reminder for those of you who may not remember, or if you're new here, one thing to keep in mind is, as we saw at the very first sentence of their baptismal agreement, to them the baptism isn't a baptism into Christ, isn't a baptism to become born again, to become a Christian. It's baptism to become a member of Homestead Heritage. So when he's saying this ultimate goal of baptism, he's not saying what we normally would think of baptism. That's not what he means. What he means is the ultimate goal of devotion to Homestead Heritage. That's what he's talking about. So remember that. The mentors would have to be thoroughly equipped, directed, and guided. So they'd have to be thoroughly guided. So yeah, he's definitely not very trusting. And so all this, they would be pledging to a certain level of responsibility for covering their mentees' behavior. And so all this would necessitate a lot of interaction. It might even be made a condition for certain Austin young people to move to Waco. Certain. Now, I'm going to let all of you consider what he means by that. Who would be the ones they would want to have moved to Waco? Just something to think about. This might also need to be applied to certain Waco young people, but not just because of the need to be fair, but because some here in Waco simply may need it just as badly as the Austin youth do. In some circumstances, the situation seems to have reached a stalemate of indecision on the part of the youth, and no one seems quite sure how to move things forward. What he really means here is not indecision on part of the youth. What he probably really means here is doubt of their teachings by the youth. Just want to throw that out there. Coupled with the geographical move to Waco, a membership program might expedite the conversion of these young people and might conceivably be seen as something positive, hope-inspiring, and even exciting. For some brothers who would be doing this mentoring, it might even be considered as a first level of ministry. A doing of the work of an evangelist, and thus making full proof of their calling. Making full proof of their calling. So they're very much trying to prove themselves. To whom? I think you know. So let's just move on. I say this because a number of these young people are already adults but still need to be won to God. Their home lives did not lead them all the way to Christ, or at least all the way to conversion in Christ. Ooh, think about what that means. Going back to their definition of the body and Christ. So they are truly a mission field. In any event, These might be possibilities the membership board would want to consider. And these are the types of situations they would be called upon to cover in the body. Of course, the group ministers would be the ones to fully implement this within their groups or with other group ministers. I want to now briefly mention what I believe constitutes the place the membership board should assume in the body in light of what I shared in this and my last letter. Very disorganized letters. Very disorganized. Let's keep going. As I stated before in regard to the reinstatement board, some of those serving on the board, as long as they were spiritually mature and stable in character, need not be ministers of proclamation or constitutional elders. In fact, in situations where authority seems to have been inordinately concentrated in men with certain proclaiming gifts, in other words, apostles, prophets, and teachers, even to the point where a congestion of power occurs that short-circuits the effectual working of the entire body, with its many diverse needs and ministries, including the effectual work of those proclaiming ministries themselves, then as Paul's list in 1 Corinthians 12 seems to indicate, separate gifts of helps and governments. So now you see he really pushes governments as the word, not administrations, typically functioning in an area of authority distinct from that of the proclaiming ministries seems especially called for. The membership board seems to me to fit just such a need at this time. Again, in the simplest terms, which he's not very good with. I believe on one level it should serve to confirm membership decisions made by the group ministers and the baptism preparation course teachers. The testimony of the parents, where there are parents involved, as well as the final assessment by the teachers of the preparation course for baptismal candidates, would both prove critical in regard to membership decisions. Now, after saying in simplest terms, he says, in short, without prior decision-making in terms of what some responsible intermediary member feels concerning a candidate's preparedness for reinstatement, no confirmation can be given. That was not in short. In fact, as said, the preparation teachers must play an integral role in the whole decision and confirmation process. If a mentorship program were to begin, then the mentors would also play an integral role in the whole process, working under the membership board. I've already mentioned in the last letter the pattern that should be followed for the board's operation in regard to candidates who are family members or potential family members. The same pattern should be followed with this new enlarged board. Also, I believe this board should be self-perpetuating. In other words, that the board should appoint a replacement for any member who ceases to function because of his death or for any other reason. I have also assumed that it went without saying that all confirmations made by the board will be unanimous. In light of what I have just said about the membership board covering all three areas of membership status, I have thought of adding brothers to the ones already designated for the reinstatement board. But I would like to privately submit some names for the consideration of those brothers already appointed to the board. They might also submit to me names of brothers of high integrity that they feel God would have serve on this board. Now he just goes throwing in some of his suggestions of people. Then he says again, please let me know your feelings and responses to this and the last letter. And please forgive my sloppy organization of this letter. If I felt better, I would reorganize it to make it more coherent and easier to read, but I cannot now do this. I hope you can grasp the points that I've tried to make here. I tried and failed miserably, in my opinion. Then we come to the last of the three letters. This one's very short, and interestingly, this one has no date on it. Dear brothers, this is a short addendum to the last letter I sent regarding the membership board. I just wanted to add 2 points regarding the functioning of this board. Whenever situations come to the attention of the board where the church is uncovered due to sin that might virulently spread through the fellowship and nothing sufficient is apparently being done to remedy such a situation in a timely fashion, the membership board should investigate and take measures to encourage the individual ministers involved to take decisive action. Then it should work closely with them to ensure that this is done. In situations regarding family members of elders who are not under the covering of a particular group fellowship, so are in effect under the covering only of their father because he leads the group, the membership board should automatically become involved in deciding how to deal with such a situation. So he goes back to pretty much repeating what he said in the first letter, only now trying to make it a little more solid that it should not be the parent making this decision, which is extremely ironic. After what he'd said previously about family, this kind of shows family doesn't carry that much weight for him. Or does it? Let me throw this out at you, okay? This is going to be my own opinion, my own theory, in a sense, of what's really happening here. By this last letter, he seems to keep going back and forth. Family is so important, family's not what really matters. Here's the difference. In this case, he's talking about the authority of keeping people in who are truly loyal to Homestead, truly brainwashed by this cult, and not letting in others who are moles, you could say. That's where he says not to let their father be the one to make the choice, not to let the father be the one that gives the information that decides this. He's afraid of Homestead crumbling. He's afraid of these moles getting in. Ultimately, he's afraid of the truth being seen. We saw he's worried about reputation of Homestead Heritage. His concern here only comes in these places, not because he truly is worried about bias that comes with family, because we see he obviously has his own. No, his concern is about people getting in, not following the structure he has put in place. His concern is people getting into Homestead who are not devoted to his teachings. That's what this is all about. You go back and you look at these letters entirely. That's all this is. It's him trying to make sure he stays in power even after he's gone. He has that authority even after he dies. That's his real concern here. You see nothing in this. Even when he talks about evangelism, you see nothing of real concern for the lost. You do not see any hint of him wanting to go out for the one and leaving behind the 99. You see the opposite of Jesus in this. He doesn't want to lead by serving them. He wants to lead by governing them. That's what this comes down to. This is Blair Adams becoming a tyrant who wants to keep control even after he's dead. That's it. That's what this is. For those who want to keep defending him, who want to keep denying he was the problem, trust me, he's not the problem. Satan's the problem. Deceit is the problem. Lies are the problem. But he definitely is carrying the problem and promoting it. So I really hope going through these letters has woken at least some of those who have doubted Blair Adams really was the issue, really was a problem in this matter. I hope this will remove a lot of that doubt and help you see, nope, he wanted God's position from the start. Even if, very beginning, he didn't necessarily seek it, he definitely had that temptation. From everything I heard, it's why he got led down the road he went of building this cult. I really pray some of the leadership at Homestead Heritage starts to break free from it. I'll see you all next time. God bless.